Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi!
Hello friends, I've got some exciting news to share with you in this video. Snowprint have decided to try something new this month to allow us as content creators to provide you with the information about characters early, rather than hanging on to that information just prior to character release. I'm personally pretty pleased about this, and I know that Snowprint read the comments in my videos, so please share your thoughts if this is something that you would like to see continue. Unfortunately, this current test build does not have a workable version of Tangira, so I can't share any information or footage about him. However, today I will talk through the legendary character, Vitruvius Thannek, show you some gameplay footage, answer some Q&As about his interactions, and then leave you with some infographics and analysis for his legendary release event. Everything is timestamped, so let's just jump straight in. This is the character screen for Vitruvius Thannek. He's got a pretty cool character model, and I think that the ad mech in particular are very well done. As always, kudos to the art department. In terms of traits, we can see the mechanic and mechanical traits at the top right of the screen. His stats are shown at Diamond 2, and he has a movement of 3. Thannek has a single hit attack for both his melee and ranged profile. He has a power melee attack and a ranged molecular attack. We'll just remind ourselves that this has a 60% pierce ratio. His items also show him having a crit booster to go along with his block shield. His active ability is Rad Bombardment, which does toxic damage to all units in a line. Toxic is a new damage type that does 70% pierce and has a chance to apply the new Contamination Hex effect. The size of this line increases for every turn that is passed and for every mechanical unit healed. His passive is Master Annihilator, and it allows a bonus hit for the next 3 attacks applied to a unit to do bonus damage, capping based on Thannek's skill level. We'll look more closely at this shortly. We can now dive straight in and look at Thannek's active ability. Rad Bombardment, if used on turn 1, does damage to 2 hexes. You'll also note this cool green terrain effect that represents contamination. We cycle through to the Tyranid turn, and the Winged Prime now has 2 new debuffs, the Contaminated effect and the Contamination Hex effect, which reduces its armor. You'll notice the difference in the number of turns for each of those effects, representing how many turns the tile will have the Hex effect versus how many turns the Prime will have its armor reduced. Briefly in this clip we can also see the passive effect applied, Master Annihilator. This adds a 3rd debuff to the unit that shows how many more attacks will benefit from Thannek's bonus hit. This is a slightly longer clip where we can play around with the active and passive abilities a bit more. Here we skip through the first few turns so that I can demonstrate the active ability increasing in size. Having had several turns elapse, the active now extends to the end of the map and applies to the Death Leaper. You'll also notice that the active has applied Thannek's passive ability, Master Annihilator. The next things I wanted to show you were to address some of the questions I've been asked. You'll see that after Thannek applied the debuff, Actus makes an attack and burns a charge. The debuff now reduces to 2 hits. One of the questions was whether or not you could stack the passive to more than 3. As you'll see here, the answer is no. It simply resets Thannek's debuff to 3 hits. The other question was about whether or not Thannek's debuff carried over between turns. Again, here the evidence is that despite skipping several turns, we can still see that the Tyrant Guard maintains that debuff effect. Finally, the question was, does Thannek's passive trigger on heal or repair, specifically relating to Actus, which allows him to take another attack? And the answer here is yes, it does. I can now talk you through his infographic and where he might best be used. We've spoken previously about the hits and equipment available. Tawin has kindly provided some information here in terms of stat data, and we can see that Thannek actually ranks quite well here. He has a great damage stat and scores in the 90th centile against guild raid bosses. His health stat is also pretty good, although his armor is below average. From a mechanic healing perspective, Thannek is below Aleph Null but above Actus, suffering because of his low hits and how that feeds into how healing is calculated. I think there is already a lot of ad mech synergy that we can see, but I am hopeful about his use in guild raids. I don't have a lot of time to craft and test this stuff out, so I've just thrown together a quick video about him attacking the current Legendary 4 Screamer Killer with a sort of single hit team. There's probably a better team out there, but it gives you a small flavour of how this works. Excitingly, we can see that this passive effect does apply to the bosses, and that's amazing. I've brought along Show because the way to maximize the passive is to try and get characters with high damage hits, and then adding things like High Ground and Marker Light bonuses in order to bring you closer to the maximum threshold for the passive damage bonus. I played through this quite slowly, so feel free to sit back and enjoy some instrumental music alongside some Tau gameplay. At the end of this video, we're left with a hit that does just under 300k damage. That's a number that compares favourably with other teams that are currently attacking the L4 Screamer Killer, including Ra and other multi-hitters. Clearly this isn't going to be the best team for every boss, simply because Show isn't usable everywhere. However, I like this direction and flexibility that Snowprint are giving to us. It's nice to have other teams to play with apart from Eldryon and friends, and it's also nice to play with teams that involve your favourite characters. Personally, I love Show and I love Tau, and therefore I'll be going hard on this guy and trying to theory craft teams and opportunities for his use. In the second half of this video, we'll touch on the Legendary release event. If you've been playing Tacticus for a while, you'll be familiar with this sort of release style, but I'll do a quick preamble for those of you who are watching who are newer. These events are designed as mid to end game events that test your roster against fixed enemies and traits, and the idea is to force you to build a wide roster with characters that fulfill a variety of traits in order to achieve success. The event is divided into tracks that each has its own usable characters and restrictions. As this is the first run of the Thannek event, any progress that you make is saved for future iterations. You should expect to clear at least 8 levels of the Alpha, Beta and Gamma tracks if you want to unlock him as a free-to-play player. If you're willing to spend, you can reduce this requirement to 6 full tracks. I'll take you quickly through the event itself in-game and show you the different tracks and restrictions and requirements. If you're so inclined, you can slow or pause the video down and copy all of this for yourself, but I have summarized this at the end of this section in infographic and in text form. On this page, you can see an infographic for all of the characters in the game and how many points they score you. I like this infographic as a quick visual aid to see which characters in your roster will score you the most points. This bit here is a Google Sheet which I have created that filters all of the characters of the game by trait. It is available via video description below for you to access and edit as needed. In terms of areas that I think players should be mindful, the hardest event track is likely to be Gamma. The Astra Militarum units do a ton of damage and have some powerful skills and effects, and you're not allowed to bring any Imperial units to the fight, due to the restrictions. The other thing worth mentioning is the one-hit trait restriction for the Necrons section. Unless you plan carefully or consider characters like Pestilin, it's going to be really hard to beat this requirement due to the Scarab swarms. I have created brief infographic analysis slides for the Alpha, Beta and Gamma sections. Alpha sees us face the Necron units, and the kill orders and priorities are listed here on screen. You want to focus down the Scarabs before they multiply, and you can identify which ones haven't used their multiply ability by clicking on the unit and checking if their ability icon is green or grey. I've already mentioned the difficulty with maximum 1 hits, and I think if you're wanting to go very deep, then Pestilin will be invaluable. The Beta section I'll gloss over largely because we've seen these enemies and units before. Nothing particularly new, and I would suggest focusing on the Bloodletters because they do the most damage to you. The Gamma section is tricky because of how much damage these Imperial units do. The best advice I can give you is to try and stay close to the spawn points so that the las cannon and mortar teams are unable to make ranged attacks against you. Try and trigger battle fatigue as much as possible and avoid standing in the artillery strike hexes or areas. That's all I've got for today. If this video was useful for you, I'd love if you could consider entering my referral code on screen. It gets you 100 Blackstone and also supports me in the work that I do. It's single use though, so choose who you support carefully. Finally, I'm part of the Eye of Terror cluster, and we're looking for a couple of recruits for the end of this raid season. We're a pretty analytical and successful group of players, with almost everyone in the top 25. Drop by our server via link in the video description if you're interested in joining us. Bye for now.
Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi!